All right, guys, this is Chris with Drop Dice. So we are back with another random thoughts video here. So this one is actually a video response from, or to Ian from Fantastic Dimensions. Um, Give me 1 second because my throat is still messed up from the being sick here. Ian from Fantastic Dimensions created a video that talked about GM horror tips, let me see here, GM Insight horror gaming tips. And so this one's kind of my video response to his initial video because he wanted to see what other GMs do as far as providing horror inside their games. So I don't have an extreme amount of experience with Call of Cthulhu, but I do like a lot of the mythos and the horror that comes with it. So I too typically take a lot of what Call of Cthulhu is and then just kind of like implant it like a mythos egg in my world anyways. My players always joke around and say no matter what game we are playing, we're ultimately playing Call of Cthulhu, and that's kind of true. So I love horror aspects, and I think there is some ways to kind of execute it in a way that makes sense for the world. So the first thing that I would suggest is setting up a normal static level, like a homeostasis for the world, if you would. Because the players have to know what normal is to be able to experience those high points in the horror and things like that. During his video, Ian brought that up inside there as well. He phrased it a little bit differently. He was talking about how if you have a high point followed by another high point followed by another high point, that's the basic equation to an action film or an action game. Whereas having kind of this up and down momentum is how you really show a horror game. And the way that I typically do that is I won't do a horror story one after another, which is part of the reason I kind of stay away from Call of Cthulhu, because I always feel like those games are kind of horror story after horror story. So what I do instead is I take elements from like Call of Cthulhu or some horror games and I implant them in other games so that my characters have, or my players, I should say, have an understanding of what's normal for those PCs. And what can be considered horror actually varies quite a bit. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to get to know my PCs if I get a chance, or my players rather, if I get a chance. Because a lot of the times you can find things that bother the players that they will let bother their characters, even though their character may or may not be afraid of it in story. So, for example, my fiance Ariel decided to try Dungeon World with us. I know that she hates insects, and so for the first thing that they came across, it was a pitfall trap in the middle of a desert. It was a like a sinking dune pit, and inside were these large centipedes with venom, and they were basically the size of small horses. And they come across the pit and they discover it before they fall in because they got lucky. Um, and then one of the characters goes, I want to see what's in there. So they tie him up and they lower him in. And I kind of describe that, the room's very dark. And of course, during a normal game, maybe I have more upbeat of a tone, but when you get to those more serious moments, you kind of adjust your tone properly. So I tell them, okay, as you're being lowered into this pit, it's very dark in here. It's almost so dark that you can feel it on you. If you check to see your hand in front of your face, you can't make sense out of it. It's almost hard to tell which direction is up at this point. So he has this overwhelming sense of darkness around him. And then to kind of intensify things, I tell him, you can hear what sounds like a chittering or a scraping sound. It's just like, and I don't really describe anything beyond that. Ian talked about how you should only give them the information they absolutely need, and that's another really key important point. Is because he's been lowered into this pit and he's never played a game with me before or know what I'm interested in doing. And to be fair, I don't use insects a lot. Actually, both examples I'm going to talk about include insects, but I honestly don't use them all that much beyond these two examples. But inside this first example, I don't really use insects a lot. He didn't know what to expect from me because it was the first time I was GMing for him. And he got himself down into the bottom, and because he didn't know what he was looking for, he finally pulled out a torch right before he hit the bottom, and he saw that this cave was full of these things. And then they pulled him back up, and he said, hey, there's some stuff down there. Let's go in there and get it. Well, when they came down there, what I did is I took away light sources. And I knew that that would bother Ariel, because Ariel, as a person, has a fear of bugs, especially poisonous bugs that she thinks can kill her, or not poisonous bugs that she still thinks are poisonous. Um, so in the game, these bugs happen to be poisonous, and they kind of discovered that. And as I kind of played it up, I described them in more detail as they came into the light. And I was more describing what the cast shadows were on them rather than describing what they actually look like. So I was kind of intensifying the situation by talking about these huge mandibles, because in the firelight from one torch, they looked like they were these oversized, menacing pinchers. And I talked about how the light was being cast, and when she would cast a spell that included light elements, it would light up the room, and she could see him for a moment. Well, Dungeon World has a really neat mechanic that I carry over to horror games just all the time. Essentially, when you roll, you can get three types of results. There's a complete success, where you get everything that you wanted for. And then there's, well, technically, you can do four results if you want to get crazy with it. There's complete success, and I get more than I expected. That's kind of an optional thing. But then there's complete success, you get what you were expecting. A marginal success, or success with cost, which is kind of that middle ground result, which means you can do this, but it will cost you that, which I really like. And then there's failure. So when I do a horror game, I actually take success out of the equation as much as possible, or at least true success out of the equation as much as possible. So what I do is I tend to intensify the situation. I make everything have a cost, and I make the players fully aware of those costs as we go through the horror situation. So if they want to, go after this one bug, they can do so, but they might end up pinning themselves or separating themselves from the group who's currently fighting in the center. And in a horror situation, that's the kind of thing that they have to think about. Do I stay with the group? Do I break away? And if they break away, as a GM, I try to take advantage of that moment to kind of spring more on them and intensify the situation even more. So maybe they break away. I'm going to lock their foot in a pile of bones that's inside the bottom of this thing. And now they're trying to fight off these bugs, trapped in a corner by themselves. They've got no torch light, and they can't get their foot unstuck from like some dead dude's sternum. And it's up to the party to figure out where he is from his screams, and maybe get some light in this place to get this situation under control. To be honest, the guy that was lowered in, I don't know why he chose to bring everybody inside the pit, but he did, because he had fair warning what was in there before he even did it. Which, that was a player choice. Sometimes players think they can take on more challenges than what they necessarily are ready for. And this was their first time with Dungeon World, which is a little bit more lethal, and so I don't think they realized that going in. And one of my players died. Ian talks about not pulling punches. I think that's another really important aspect when you have these horror moments. Just don't fudge your dice. In fact, I generally roll in front of my players nowadays. When I'm on the computer, I typically don't, because I like rolling real dice. I hate Dice Stream. I always do poor on Dice Stream. If you guys ever catch any of my videos that I've done live plays in, Amped, the Horns of Ceranos, even videos you guys, or even games that you guys haven't seen that I've done with other people that weren't live plays, I just do terrible with Dice Stream. It hates me. I did okay with the Fate Roller, and I actually was really impressed with the Fate game. But everybody tells me that the Fate Roller is a little bit more balanced, whereas Dice Stream is wonky. But that's a whole different subject. But basically, when I roll, I will literally roll in front of my players. And I won't change anything. I'll let them see dice. I'll let them figure out the math inside their head, and then they go, "Oh crap! That lich can throw Finger of Death at me. I'm going to die." And I think that when you do horror, it kind of breaks into two categories, really. There's, and this is because the way the genre has gone. Well, really, I'd say three categories actually. So there's horror slasher flick style, which is kind of like your 80s horror where people are going to die, things are going to get messy before you figure out what's going on, and there's a chance that very few or one person will survive and make it out. And they're not going to make it out completely whole either. They're going to have some sort of loss. Um, I like slasher styles, but I feel like for a game going in that intently to basically just full bore kill your party one-on-one is a little extreme. So I don't use that situation very often, but I still have it inside my arsenal. For that style of game, one of my tips is separate your party. If your bad guy can kill them when they're separated, don't give him a chance to roll or anything, or set up your bad guy so that he's smart and he doesn't allow them to attack him. So let's say, you're playing a Freddy Krueger style game. Well, Freddy Krueger can easily separate you because as soon as you fall asleep, he can kill you in your dreams, and there's not really much you can do about it unless you happen to figure out that you can control your own dreams and blah, blah, blah. Well, so the first couple victims, which you always want to kind of start with NPCs to kind of set the mood with more disposable characters. Sorry, I'm actually getting past this sickness. I'm just coughing up the junk in my lungs right now, which sounds terrible. I know you guys love me for this sort of thing right now that I'm talking about. But so like in those types of situations, I would start with NPCs that are disposable. If you really want to turn it up a notch, what you could do is take an NPC that the players care about, somebody that they've had multiple visits with in the past. And this is where establishing that level of homeostasis for the world is important. So let's say they have their favorite bartender, and we'll call him Fast Eddie Malone. So Fast Eddie Malone is a half bar, and he happens to be a troll street dealer on the side. I'm sorry, he's not an orc. He's a troll, and this is Shadowrun. Let's say I use Fast Eddie Malone because he's actually one of my contacts for Shadowrun and my silly character on there. But Fast Eddie Malone, he goes missing. So he goes missing, and the players are obviously going to look for their friend Fast Eddie, and maybe as the GM, I have Fast Eddie murdered in kind of a weird way that speaks to magic, because Shadowrun has both magic and technology going on. So when the players go to investigate, I give them the minimal clues that they really need to kind of start this investigation process. And I let them know, Fast Eddie was a dealer. He dealt with like illegal cybernetics and things like that. And chances are the cops aren't really going to investigate it. So if you guys want to find out more about it, you have to do the investigation yourself. So they go ahead and start pushing on. And I continue this level of normalcy, and I kind of make it too normal is kind of the first trick. Is you make it very, very plateaued, normal aspect, and then you come in with a punchy scene right away with like maybe it could be something as if like maybe a new clue was discovered, but it requires like a chase scene, something like that. But to go with this 80s horror flick style, it's not going to be the players chasing someone, it's going to be someone chasing them. And I would definitely stage that inside a place that conveyed the correct kind of tone. So maybe like an abandoned warehouse, maybe like a meat processing factory. That would actually be kind of a cool place to do it, especially if he happens to be kind of more of like a machete wielding crazy nut job. And then let them go through the place, and then when they get that success with a cost, maybe they run into like chains and stuff like that, and maybe they're just taking damage from trying to run away from whatever the hell is chasing them down. And always make your descriptions very big about what this thing is that's chasing them. If you've ever seen Evil Dead, the first Evil Dead, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. And a little bit of the second Evil Dead, as those movies went on, they became even more satirical. But in the first movie, You see more of it in the second movie, but there is a creature that is outside of the house that you don't really understand what it is. The camera moves with this creature, and this creature moves in, and it comes up and it sees inside the house, and it sees what they're doing. It becomes awakened because of the mistake they made. Um, if you can watch one of those movies like Evil Dead 2, you can learn a lot of good techniques about how you should maybe narrate your monster. Don't give away details about him as or any details that you can avoid giving away. Um, like eventually, if you watch Evil Dead, you'll figure out what the monster is, and I'm not going to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen those movies. But in the second movie, they show a picture of it, and it's actually kind of funny if you play D&D. It's a D&D monster, but you'll have to watch the movies if you haven't seen it already. But this creature is kind of the epitome of evil, and Ash, the main character, knows it's out there, and he knows that he's trying to get away from it, but it won't let him go. Having that evil being, that menacing creature, trapping them in a situation that can up the stakes again, without necessarily going into that action movie mode, because they'll still have a sense of normalcy within their new environment. So that's all stuff you can explore. Now, the second type of horror game is suspense horror. Um, to me, this is more like ghost movies. Things where things are very normal, but during certain conditions, you have a lot of like bang, flash, big time scenes that come up. Basically, these scenes are kind of the high point, and it's to get the viewer kind of to jump a little. Ian talked about in his video banging the table. I don't like that technique because I just don't like banging the table, and that's just me. But I think that in that style of game, a suspense style game, that would be a very valuable asset. Another thing that you could do, which I've done in the past, is I've wrote a note, and I've given players like all a bunch of random notes, and the notes may say nothing inside of them. It may say, you know, uh, nothing. I'm just sending you a note. It doesn't even have to say anything inside there. But one player is going to get a real note, and that player is going to find out something that maybe the other players don't know. And I think suspense games work even better if you take the time to tell your characters that they have to have secrets from each other. They have to be hiding something from each other. They all have to have a common goal or a common reason to be together, usually a past event. And then they all have to have secrets, which may or may not be related to that past event. It's usually a little better if they are related to that past event, but having that commonality that also kind of separates you because you all have your own secrets to tell about or not to tell about this event really intensifies the situation. So, for example, let's say, you and your group of adventurers were a bunch of murder hobo bastards and burned down the tavern. Well, the tavern owner died inside there, but you didn't know that he had a daughter who made it out. Now the daughter is seeking revenge. So during that burning down of the tavern, maybe one of those players decided that he was going to rob the place, and he didn't want the other players to know because he's the rogue, and that's what rogues do. Another player, maybe he could have stopped it, but he chose not to, and that's his terrible secret, that he could have stopped the whole thing from happening. And let's say a third character, his character is the one that actually started the fire, but the reason he started the fire is because he was having an affair with the innkeeper's wife, and she refused to leave her husband for it, and so out of jealous rage he set the place on fire. But he made it look like it was a drunken accident, and that's what the party thinks, is that everybody got drunk and they burned down the inn and they managed to get out of town before the cops caught on, and they think that they're good to go. In this kind of scenario, I would let them go about 4 or 5 sessions, maybe longer, before I even introduce the daughter seeking revenge. And the daughter, when she's seeking revenge, that kind of character wants you to know her problem, to know her pain. And so when she's going to do her actions, it's not going to be a malicious, I'm going to stab you kind of thing. It's going to be, I'm going to come at you and I'm going to hurt you like you hurt me, which is really valuable in horror games. And suspense especially really thrives on this this communicable pain aspect or this communicable fear aspect. Essentially, sharing a common background with differences inside there, and having this pressure to, maintain your own secrets, but try and get out because, everybody's in it for themselves. There's a lot of good movies that kind of follow that. If you happen to like Sword Art Online or animes in general, there's a story arc in Sword Art Online where they help out a guild that fell apart because of selling an item, and you find out that they play this hoax to try and catch the person who stole from their old guild master and killed her. I think that that's a good example of how you can kind of do that sort of thing, because each of them have their own little bit of secrets. It's not as pertinent as what I'm suggesting, where they all have separate secrets that could get them in trouble with each other. Because the guy who burned down the inn, if his party members found out that that's why he burned down the inn, they'd probably be a little pissed at him because he did it over a petty reason, and they're wanted by the knights and the guards of this one particular city. And you can reinforce that with like bounties and things like that to kind of keep that tone going. I think Sword Art Online actually has a lot of really good horror aspects, because it starts as a game where it's supposed to be all fun and games online, and then you find out that you can die. And if you look at it, the parts that I think are very valuable for role-playing games are the psychological parts of it. Like just knowing that there's mortality inside this game. If you can bring that point alone to your RPG, that there is mortality, that can really intensify and heighten your horror games. So the third type is what I'd call horror survival, or horror social is kind of the other term for that. So for these types of games, you look at stuff like zombies, monster movies, Ravenloft. Call of Cthulhu kind of falls in this category. Essentially, the world is fucked up. There's not a whole lot you can do to make it better. I mean, you can temporarily make it better for yourself, but in the end, the world is still a fucked up place, and your efforts are a drop in the bucket. So with this kind of game, it's actually more about the social aspect. So for zombie games, everybody likes zombies. Instead of treating at the very beginning of the game, you can treat the zombies as the monsters that they are. But after a while, your characters become stronger, and the zombies are no longer a problem. They have to become a condition of the world. They have to kind of become the norm, and that will happen naturally on its own throughout the game. And you can kind of turn them into like a battlefield condition instead of actually being monsters. Like, the best part about zombies is you can give them each one hit point and then throw like 50 of them at your 4-player party, and they'll mow through them, but just keep throwing 10 more every round. Oh, 10 more zombies show up, 20 more zombies show up. Like the Romero films when they're in the mall and the zombies finally break in and they're just everywhere. Like that kind of style of bringing zombies in and just having them everywhere is definitely something you can do, but that's not the focus of horror survival or horror social games. What the focus is, the real villains in that story are actually man. It shows that in a bad situation, that man will do what he can or what he must to survive, or to basically excel in his new environment. Basically, it's like kind of pushing Darwinism to an extreme, that the fittest will survive naturally. So your people who have the most assets available to them, the most skills available to them, they'll become the greater majority of the world now. So guys that used to be probably part of the lower rung of society, like your your plant manufacturers, your woodworkers, things like that that do a lot of handcraft skills, because we've got machines and things like that to do it. If we lose the power grid, all of a sudden that guy who knows how to chop wood, make furniture, understands how to acquire fuel out of the ground without having this huge system of pipe works and things like that, how to actually set up a singular like oil pipeline and get it up through a pump, that guy becomes immensely important because he has the skills to get you stuff that you need to survive. The guy that knows how to make bullets becomes exceptionally important. You see this stuff in apocalypse games. They kind of follow that same mechanic. And one of the most important things about having a horror survival / social game is the survival part dictates that you need to always have limited resources. Now, if your players are smart and they hole up, like I mentioned in the Romero films, you go to a big mall like Mall of the Mainland, and you hole up inside there. Sure, there's a lot of stuff that can get you by for quite a long time. If they do that, do what they did inside that film. Essentially, have some roving band of assholes barge in, try and take a bunch of stuff that they think is valuable, leave, and then leave them open to zombie attack now, and have them have to deal with that. Part of the fun of those games is kind of figuring out the world now that it's changed and what you can do to either find your way to a new comfortable place or find your way back. In those games, more than any other game, I really don't mind player suicide. In fact, or sorry, not player suicide, character suicide, I should say. In fact, if I can get a character to contemplate suicide, or possibly just thinking, you know what, I can't deal with the zombies, I'm just going to walk out there with dynamite strapped to my chest and blow myself up, I think that's an accomplishment, because honestly, in those types of games, you want to have overwhelming odds. The zombies need to be like a firestorm. It's something that you're just going to have to deal with. You're going to have to hope that you make it out alive. Now, I used the zombies as an example, but like if you look at other game systems like Ravenloft, like the vampires and the death knights inside that setting are kind of the big guys that are out there, but they have legions of undead and knights that are in their service that are living in hopes of promise of getting held into their afterlife and things like that. If you have just this daunting, overwhelming, overpowerful force in the world that just can't be stopped, and if you did stop it somehow, there's going to be something coming in that's going to be just as bad or if not worse. I think you're accomplishing the goal if you set up something like that. So those are kind of the three main horror types of games that I like to run. There's a whole bunch of other subgenres of horror, but I think those are kind of the main three that that you can really play up very well, because there are a ton of examples out there on the internet, just on videos, movies, books. If you get a chance and you want to find out a little bit more about some good examples about different types of horror, what I'd suggest is if you go to Netflix, just type in horror there, and you'll come up with the whole horror list. I would really look at the ones that explore non-traditional things. Like one of them was Daybreakers, which is a vampire flick, but essentially vampires have taken over the world and they're kind of the norm. But if they don't feed, or they feed on another vampire and they eventually starve themselves, they become Nosferatu style vampires where they're hunched over in these monstrosities. So in that game, the few humans that were left alive, yeah, it was horror for them, but for the vampires themselves, they were also facing their own doom, because they had harvested mankind near extinction. And during the movie, you see that man has been strapped to machines to draw out their blood to keep the vampires going as long as they could. But they talk about how it's a failing issue, that it's something that can't be stopped. And basically mankind kind of evolved into vampires in this story. and they figure out a way to go back to being human in the movie itself. And the movie itself was not really rated that well. I thought it was a pretty good movie. Um, but the reason I mention it is because it is very different than your traditional Dracula style vampire movie. Um, I think the stuff that is outside of the norm to be expected is what's more interesting as far as like doing research to get yourself set up for one of these games. Um, let's see, what is another one? So if you get a chance to read it, the Constantine comic books are actually a very good example of a little bit more action horror, kind of the stab you in the face kind of horror. Um, that 80s slasher flick style. It does have elements of like investigative horror or that suspense horror inside there, but it's a little bit more like how you would play a game. So I would definitely recommend reading those. Um, let me think here. Mm-mm-mm. You know, my brain is dying right now. So if I think of anything else, I will add it to the description list. I know that I'm probably going to finish this video, and then I'm going to think of like 4 things that I can add on here. What I'll do is I'll put together a small list of things that are on Netflix, because I know most people have Netflix as far as movies they can watch, or if I happen to know of any that are on YouTube. Um, I'll put a small selection of ones that I think that are good on there, and maybe like 4 books or something like that too. I'll let you guys take a look at that whenever you want. And thank you, Ian, for going ahead and starting this conversation. I saw the original post that kind of inspired this, and the guy was talking about how how the players separated themselves, and he would just kill one of them and take them away. And inside that style of game, I thought that was actually pretty appropriate. Um, so long as your players don't have like a huge hit point pool like they did in like Pathfinder or 3.5, because then you tend to have players that want to kind of argue and say, hey, I want to fight that thing. Um, I mean, you're the GM. You can always go, no, he stabbed you through the neck and through the throat. You're not fighting him. You're dead. Um, but you know, it's all about setting expectations. The players should know that if they're going to play in a horror game, that death is a strong possibility. Um, like L5R has horror aspects in there, and I always warn my characters that combat is very intense. It's a very deadly game. If you die, you die. That's just going to be the end of it. There's no resurrection in this game. Which kind of leads me to a secondary point. Um, for games, if you want to increase the horror aspect of it, I would actually turn up the volume on damage. Or rather not damage, but healing. I would actually tone that back a little bit, is actually how I would phrase that. So if you look in the DMG for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, they talk about a slower healing rate. I would definitely use those rules. I would make combat more gritty. I would tell them, hey guys, you know, during this game, maybe I'm going to increase all criticals for everybody. Your players are probably going to really like that until you tell them, you know, 18 to 20 is a critical now for combat. They're going to be like, oh man, that's awesome. But when my bad guy rolls 18 to 20, it's not going to be so awesome for them. If that's not to your taste, definitely take a look at the rules as far as like you have to use a medicine check with a heal kit before someone can use their short rest recovery dice, which is pretty extreme. And you can take away that heal kit at any point if you really want to intensify the situation. You can make it to where they only gain amount of hit points equal to their level plus con back, instead of doing a full hit point recovery. Or maybe they only get their dice pool, and even if they do a long rest, they only get their dice pool from at the beginning of the game. So you have your initial hit points for level 3 plus the 3 hit dice you came into the game with, which is pretty intense. Your fighter has the strongest advantage there because of second wind. So I would definitely take a look at some of those optional rules. Another thing that I would also suggest as far as like table etiquette goes, if you have the ability, physically separate your players. If you have a character that gets separated from the party, ask that player to walk over to a different room and just wait for you to come over there. Go ahead and talk to those players that are still at that table for a moment, and then go talk to that player and explain what he sees. But don't give him any clues of what they saw. Keep them entirely separate. That way, when they come back together, they either have to share the information that they've learned, or they can keep it to themselves. This kind of goes back to that intrigue keeping secrets thing. If you do the intrigue keeping secrets and you separate them, you're going to have a pretty interesting game, because you're going to make them start to turn against each other, which is actually a little bit more vile than you as the GM throwing a monster at them. So definitely use that and take that on board. All right, I think I've talked enough about horror gaming. Obviously, I'm feeling a little better than I was yesterday. I still kind of sound crummy, and you guys can probably tell that in my voice, but hopefully this kind of makes up for that low tone I had yesterday. All right, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you at the gaming table.